Welcome back to Sleepy Science History. I hope you're nestled in bed, the world outside quiet, your mind ready to drift. Tonight, we'll slip far back in time, to warm, prehistoric oceans where the sunlight danced in endless blue. And there, moving like a living continent, was Megalodon. A shark stretching 60, even 70 feet, the silent ruler of the ancient seas. No rush, no fear, just the steady, patient power of a giant that knew no equal. So close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let the tides carry you. Because this is a story you'll want to hear to the very end. Have you ever wondered what silence sounded like before there were people to hear it? It is a silence you cannot find anymore. Not in forests, not in mountains, not even in the farthest reaches of the ocean. This was the silence of the world 3 million years ago. A silence not empty, but full of the heartbeat of the planet, the soft shifting of tides, the slow dance of life beneath waves. You are drifting now, somewhere far back in time, as though the centuries are no more than ripples on a pond, easy to slip through. The air is warm, heavy with salt and sunlight. The oceans stretch endlessly, cradling the continents like a mother's hands. Beneath the surface, light trickles down in long golden fingers, brushing the backs of creatures that would seem strange to you now. Giant sea cows grazing on beds of swaying seagrass, slow-moving turtles the size of small boats, and fish painted in impossible blues and silvers. The water is alive with movement, yet it moves slowly, like a dream you don't want to wake from. The ancient seas were warmer than ours, not by much, but enough to change everything. Coral reefs bloomed in places that today are too cold, wrapping the coasts in colors like woven tapestries. In the shallows, schools of fish glittered like drifting coins. Farther out, where the water deepened to a rich sapphire, the ocean became a vast cathedral, its pillars the shifting shafts of light, its choir the clicking, singing, rumbling voices of marine life. And yet, even in this abundance, even in this slow and generous world, there was one presence that ruled it all. A shadow. A shape so large it seemed less like a creature and more like a moving part of the sea itself. We call it now Megalodon, a name that means giant tooth. But the name is a small thing for such a being, like calling a mountain a pile of rocks. Imagine something longer than a bus, heavier than a jet, and yet moving with the fluid grace of a dancer. Imagine the confidence of a predator that has nothing to fear. In those days, when this shadow passed overhead, the light dimmed as if clouds had crossed the sun. Schools of fish broke apart like scattering starlings. Whales, young, old, sick, felt the pressure in the water change and turned away, though sometimes too late. The Megalodon swam on, slow, deliberate, its great tail moving side to side in strokes that seemed unhurried, but each one carried it farther than you could swim in a minute. And here's the strange thing. For all its size, the Megalodon was not the constant hunter you might imagine. It was not always chasing, always devouring. Like the lion on the savannah, it spent much of its life simply existing, resting in the deep, gliding beneath the thermocline, where warm water meets cold, letting its immense body drift in the balance of the two layers. It was patient. The ocean rewarded patience. The warm prehistoric seas were not a place of endless violence. They were a place of rhythms. The moon pulled at the tides, the seasons shifted currents, and life followed these invisible maps. Whales migrated in long, slow arcs. Shoals of fish rose and fell with the temperature of the surface waters. Even the great predator, for all its might, was part of these rhythms, one note in an ancient song. Perhaps that is the part that is easiest to forget, in the way we tell stories about such giants. We like to make them monsters, but the truth is softer. The Megalodon was simply another thread in the tapestry, though a thick and powerful one. Without it, the weave would have been different. If you were floating here, in the quiet space above a coral shelf, you might first feel it before you saw it. The water would seem heavier somehow, the light shifting in odd patterns. Then, from the deep blue below, the shape would rise. At first, you might think it was a hill lifting from the seafloor, but no, it moves, it breathes, it turns. Its jaw alone could be wider than you are tall, lined with teeth that look like they were carved from stone. Each tooth a weapon, yes, but also a tool perfectly shaped by time and need. And yet, as it glides past, you see something in its dark eye, not malice, but something older, an awareness of the sea in all its ages. This was not a mind that thought in days or years, but in tides and migrations, in the slow heartbeat of the earth's waters. Around it, life flows on. A turtle surfaces for air. Rays flap lazily over the sand. A school of silver fish swirls into a living mirror, flashing in the sun before darting into the safety of the reef. All of them know the presence of the Great One, but the ocean is wide. Not every meeting is a hunt. And what did the Megalodon hunt? Mostly, it seems, the great marine mammals of its time, early forms of whales and seals, their bodies rich in fat and energy. It hunted in bursts, its massive body accelerating with a force that could shatter bone. But these hunts were not constant. The ocean was generous then, and the Megalodon did not need to kill each day. Could wait. Some scientists believe its range covered nearly every warm ocean on the planet. Imagine that, a single creature whose realm might have stretched from the coasts of Africa to the shores of the Americas, from the islands of the Pacific to the bays of Europe. It swam through waters where human eyes would one day sail ships, where beaches would one day hold footprints, where harbors would one day ring with the sound of bells. But here, in this moment 3 million years ago, there are no ships, no bells, no people. Only the warm wind over the waves, the pull of the moon, the heartbeat of the sea. And somewhere out there a shadow moves, not hurried, not hiding. It is the ocean's own secret, and it does not know it will one day vanish. Because, of course, it did vanish. The reasons are still a puzzle. Was it the cooling of the oceans as ice ages began to grip the poles? Was it the changing patterns of currents, the shifting routes of prey? Or was it the slow rise of new predators, competitors that chipped away at the Megalodon's reign? No one can say for certain, but that is a mystery for another time. For now, you are still here, in the gentle rocking of ancient waves, with sunlight pooling over your skin. Somewhere below, the Megalodon swims. Somewhere deeper still, its ancestors and the long chain of life before them wait in the darkness, each link carrying the memory of the ocean. And if you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. Not a roar, not a splash, but the deep, slow whisper of a giant tail cutting through the water. A sound that belonged to another age, an age when the seas were warm and the greatest predator was not a legend, but simply part of the living world. What gives a shadow its strength? When no one is there to see it move. The question arrives like a ripple across an old lagoon, soft at the edges, widening with time. In the wide and drowsy oceans of long ago, the great shape they would one day call Megalodon moved as if it had answered that question long before there were words. It was not a beast of noise. It was not fireworks and frenzy. It was a cathedral of muscle and cartilage, a moving silence with a purpose as patient as the moon. If you drift here, just above the seam where warm water sighs against the cool, the body of the great shark is a lesson in gentle engineering. It is a torpedo softened by time, a crescent of power tucked into a living blade. The head is broad the way cliffs are broad, a platform for senses that sip the sea for meaning. The back arches into a ridge like a slow wave that forgot to break, and the tail is a full moon split in two, each lobe a paddle that never tires. The skin, from a little distance, seems smooth as midnight. Come closer and you would find it studded with tiny, backward-pointing teeth of its own, minute armor, each grain a whisper that guides the passing water so it slips rather than hisses. The body is not decorated. It is arranged, the way a coastline is arranged, shaped by 1,000 tides. She, the Great One, we do not know the name that water used for it. The shark breathes not with lungs but with movement itself. Water washes over the gills, and the sea becomes breath. The way wind becomes music in a flute. With each glide, oxygen leaks from the water into the flowing red river within, and the body answers by continuing. That is the quiet equation of the animal. Motion becomes breath, breath becomes motion. A circle, elegant and unavoidable. You might think of Jaws, and yes, there are jaws. Imagine a door to the night, hinged in bone, rimmed in stone-white triangles, each one shaped like the tip of a mountain peeled from the earth. But even this famous architecture is not about fury so much as geometry. The teeth are serrated to catch rather than slip. The jaw opens with the authority of a tide entering a bay. Yet the miracle is not only in the bite, but in the way the rest of the shark allows that bite to happen at the right place, at the right time, with the conservation of a sage and the exactness of a clock. Long before the strike, the hunt begins in stillness. Below you, in the calmer blue, the great shark hangs like a held breath. It drifts along the boundary between layers of water, the warm top that sparkles with light, and the cooler depth that turns the world to cobalt. This is the thermocline, a word that feels too crisp for something so soft. It is a seam, a curtain. It helps hide heat. It also hides intention. The Megalodon makes itself a rumor on this seam, a suggestion rather than a fact. What tells it when to move? The sea whispers to it through a network of listening points along the face and down the sides. A living map of small, open doors. Through those doors, faint vibrations and tiny electrical murmurs slip in, the messages of the world. The twitch of a fish, the shiver of a seal, the slow, drum-like sound of a whale's heart. Even the gossamer electricity in muscles making choices. To us, such signals would be nothing. To the shark, they are moonlight on a black river, a language that cannot be spoken but can be understood. The body holds its energy the way mountains hold their stillness. Muscles run in long ribbons under the skin, each one laid to pull the next, wrapped around the spine as if the shark has braided strength into itself. When the moment comes, the ribbons do not jump. They unroll. The tail beats, not frantic but decisive. A sleeper turning into a runner in a heartbeat. You might miss the acceleration if you were not already looking for it. One instant the shark is a drifting continent. The next it is a thrown spear. Somewhere in that blue, a young whale rises, healthy perhaps, but not yet slick with the knowledge of experience. Or perhaps it is an old one, a little thin around the jawbone, slow as a setting sun. The great shark does not act out of hatred. There is no drama to its motive. There is only the arithmetic of hunger and survival, the same calculation that guides all living things. Fat-rich flesh is the ocean's savings account, stored energy meant to carry a life across lean miles. The shark, keeper of none, withdraws what it needs in a single decisive entry. The strike is from below or from the side, the angle chosen the way a sculptor chooses a first cut, with the whole shape in mind. If you were the water, you would feel the impact as a bloom of pressure, petals of force unfurling through you. If you were the light, you would be scattered into 1,000 coins by the sudden churn. There is the open hinge of the jaw, yes, and the closing thunder, but the truest weapon is momentum. The shark converts distance into certainty. It is a lesson every river teaches. The long, slow gathering of water makes the fall inevitable. Sometimes the hunt is over in that first strike. Sometimes less so. The ocean makes few promises about fairness. The prey twists, kicks, flees in a ribbon of foam. The predator circles, reading the wake as if it were handwriting. The shark's patience returns like a tide. There is no need to chase recklessly. The sea is wide, and endurance favors the body made to move without interruption. The great one remembers 1,000 such meals, the way a coastline remembers 1,000 storms. Each different, all the same. Between those hunts, there is the garden of repair. You can think of nurseries, the quiet shallows where small sharks grow among the roots of ancient mangroves, in water warm enough to soothe, shallow enough to discourage larger mouths. Perhaps Megalodon mothers sought such bays, leaving their young to learn the grammar of currents in a gentler dialect. We cannot know the exact shores they chose, but we can imagine the still mornings, the sunlight through leaves, the small gray shapes practicing the language of their lineage. The art of gliding, the map of pressure, the patience of waiting. Even giants must begin as whispers. Across the open reaches, the ocean keeps time with wind. Currents become roads. Temperature becomes a season you can feel on your skin. The shark follows these roads not as a tourist but as a pilgrim. It knows where prey will gather, where the sea will be kindest to its great engine, where cold and warm fold together like two hands holding a prayer. Along these paths, it discovers the politics of the deep, other sharks, other roles. Smaller cousins cut at the edges of shoals. Sly shapes dart in and out of reef shadows. Wide-mouthed filter feeders pass like planets, large but gentle. The Megalodon does not rule with noise. It simply moves through the hierarchy like a mountain among hills. Respect is measured in space given and space kept. When storms comb the surface into white, the shark descends. Down there, the weather is something that happens to other creatures. The surface tantrum softens into a distant tapping, and the world becomes a cathedral again. Light thins to a blue soup, then to a blue memory. Pressure gathers around you like a heavy cloak. The shark wears it without complaint, a monarch born in velvet. In this quiet, the senses sharpen. A wrong move is a wasted breath. The shark's body economizes like a monastery, each motion counted, each count meaningful. What of the famous bite? The books and models tell us it was like a storm given edges. But the numbers, the neat comparisons, have a way of flattening the wonder. Close your eyes instead. Think of a door that opens where there was no door, and behind it a dark that is not emptiness but provision. The teeth are not knives so much as decision-makers. They do not linger. They do not argue. They say, now. They say, enough. And the body answers, sealing the lesson in muscle and motion. There were days without meals. The ocean, generous as it was, could also be distant. The shark's belly, a bag for times like these, tightened into a teacher, taught patience again and again. You, floating above this ancient theater, might feel that patience in the slow sweep of the tail, in the way the shark uses the sea the way a glider uses the sky, finding slopes and gentle descents inside something that looks flat. Energy conserved is energy held for the single, perfect moment. The shark was a miser of its own thunder. Sometimes, in the long afternoons of the Miocene and Pliocene seas, whales sang. Their songs braided through the water like incense in a vaulted hall. The shark did not sing back. Its reply was a different kind of music, the deliberate percussion of a body displacing water with intent. The two musics did not clash. They coexisted, as wind and branch coexist in a forest. Each told the sea, I am here, and the sea, which contains multitudes, made room for both. There is a tenderness in such a predator that is easy to miss. Not kindness, nature's kindness is impartial and often cold, but the tenderness of fit. To see the shark move is to see a key slide into the lock of its world. Every part is an answer to a question posed by the ocean. How to move without alerting the school. Shape the body like a stream's thought. How to breathe while moving and move while breathing. Marry the two until they cannot be told apart. How to find what is hidden. Grow ears for pressure and eyes for electricity. How to survive. Eat seldom but eat well. Grow large enough that only hunger and time can make you bow. And yet, beside this fit, there is fragility hidden in the edges. To be made for warmth is to suffer cold. To be tethered to the routes of others is to be bound to their fortunes. If the sea shifts its lanes, if ice begins to write its slow script at the poles, then the roads of plenty bend and fray. The shark knows none of this as prophecy. It only knows the moment. Still, the moment is already part of a long arc. The way twilight is already the beginning of night. You and I, from our far, far future, can taste the bittersweet in that thought. But here, in the living blue, the shark remains what it is. A fact, not a legend. A presence, not a story. There is a way to learn from such a creature without becoming it. Imagine the elegance of using only what the moment needs. Imagine reading the room not with eyes, but with the hush between heartbeats, listening for the faintest shift. Imagine being carried by a rhythm you did not write but have learned to trust. Perhaps this is why the thought of Megalodon, the old monarch, calms even as it awes. It is the comfort of a world that once had an answer so beautifully made for its question. Evening comes to the prehistoric sea like a tender curtain. The sun lowers, and the upper water turns to a glaze of copper. Below, the great shark pulls the shadows closer and becomes one himself. A school of fish mills like a liquid galaxy, The reef nods in slow polyp prayer. A young whale practices being brave by straying a little from the pod, then hurries back with a flutter of panic. Far out, a seal arrow walks along the surface, stitching together short breaths with long dives. The shark notes these things without hurry. It has watched such scenes play for a lifetime measured in migrations. Later, when the moon is a thin bowl cradling light, the shark will move again, up from the thermocline as softly as fog. It will align itself with a path that memory and current share. It will draw near to the edge of a chance. And when the time is right, when water says yes and geometry says now, it will change from silence to thunder and be a chapter of someone else's story. You, still floating in the audience of this grand, unhurried theater, feel your breath matching the rhythm of the tailbeat you cannot see. You feel the sea growing heavier and kinder in the same moment. You think of locks and keys. You think of doors and thresholds. You think of a shadow that is not emptiness but form, not menace but purpose. You realize the question that opened our time together has found a shape. What gives a shadow its strength? When no one is there to see it move. Perhaps it is this. Strength does not require witnesses. It requires fit. The shadow is strong because the world it moves through is the world it was made for. The Megalodon was not a myth wearing flesh. It was the answer to the ocean's long question about how to turn patience into power. The water settles. The day folds into the seabed like a letter placed back into an envelope. Above, the stars rehearse their ancient routines. Below, the great engine glides, untroubled by names, tuned to a music you can almost hear if you listen through the bones of the earth. It is not a lullaby, not exactly, but it is a cousin to one. It tells you that in some earlier chapter of the planet's dreaming, there was a living machine that turned silence into thunder and thunder back into silence, and in doing so wrote its page in blue ink across the ages. Rest with that. Let the image linger. A broad head, a moon-split tail, a body that knows the grammar of water the way trees know the wind. When you breathe in, imagine the sea sliding through gills like wind through reeds. When you breathe out, imagine the tail easing the giant forward, a single economical sweep. Tomorrow, if time can be said to pass in a dream, we will follow the shadow along the roads of the currents, through warmer lanes and colder gates, to the meeting places of prey and patience. But for now, close your eyes and float. The ocean is vast. The hunter is unhurried. And somewhere, in that old cathedral of blue, the answer to an ancient question moves as gently as sleep. How does a traveler find its way? When the road has no edges, the question drifts to you like a single grain of sand carried in a long, lazy current. In the ocean, there are no signposts. There are no painted lines. No bridges arching from one shore to another. The water itself is the only map, and it changes without warning. Yet, somehow, the great shark, the shadow they will one day name Megalodon, knew where to go. It found food. It found warmth. It found the winding corridors of the deep as if the whole sea were a house it had lived in for a lifetime. To follow this traveler, you must imagine a road you cannot see. Not a road made of stone or soil, but one made of temperature, salt, and motion. These are the ocean's secret highways, vast rivers within the sea, running silently across thousands of miles. To you, they would feel like subtle shifts in the water against your skin. A breath of warmth in one place, a sudden coolness in another. To the shark, they were as clear as a path lit by lanterns. In the ancient seas, these highways curved across the globe like invisible veins. Warm currents drifted up from the equator, carrying the sun's heat into cooler latitudes. Cold streams slid down from the poles, rich with nutrients pulled from the deep. Where these rivers met, life gathered. Whales, seals, and great schools of fish converged on these meeting points, and the Megalodon followed, not like a predator chasing prey, but like a pilgrim arriving at a festival. Imagine now that you are drifting beside it. The great body moves with no visible effort, yet each sweep of the tail is a decision, each glide a quiet conversation with the water. It knows the currents not in the way you might read a map, but in the way a bird knows the sky, by feeling its shape, by trusting the invisible hand that lifts it. Sometimes the road runs close to the shore. You might pass long, pale beaches where no human footprints will exist for millions of years. Behind them lie forests of mangrove and palm, their roots tangled like the veins of a living heart. In these shallows, the water shimmers with fish that glitter like coins in a shaken jar. The Megalodon may linger here for a time, but the shallows are not its kingdom. It belongs to the deep blue avenues. Other times, the current carries the traveler far from land. Days may pass without any hint of shore, only the endless sway of the horizon and the constant, patient pulse of the tail. Yet the shark is not lost. The ocean itself is its compass. The angle of the sun through the water, the subtle taste of salt carried from distant places, the murmured songs of migrating whales. It is a kind of navigation we have almost forgotten. We rely on instruments, on maps drawn in ink, on coordinates written in numbers. But the Megalodon's map was alive. It breathed. It shifted. It was drawn not in lines, but in layers, warm above, cold below, fast in the middle, still at the edges. Even the stars were part of it. On clear nights, the surface shimmered with their reflection, and perhaps, in some deep and wordless way, the shark knew them too, as familiar companions in its endless migration. There is a rhythm to such journeys. Days of travel are like the slow breathing of the sea itself. The Megalodon feeds when the opportunity comes, but much of the time it simply moves, its great body storing the energy of each meal for the long miles ahead. This patience is not boredom. It is the same patience a river has when it winds through a valley, unhurried but unstoppable. In these travels, the shark encounters other voyagers. A leatherback turtle, older than the reefs themselves, drifts alongside for an hour before vanishing into its own path. A pod of dolphins passes, clicking and whistling, curious but careful. Far below, a sperm whale moves like a dark continent, diving into depths the shark will never visit. The sea is not empty. It is a moving city, each traveler with its own invisible destination. There are times when the current bends into a place of abundance. The water thickens with life, plankton blooming like stars in a midnight sky, fish gathering in great swirling masses, whales singing as they feed. These are the ocean's marketplaces, where every kind of life comes to trade in energy. The energy of sunlight turned into plants, of plants turned into flesh, of flesh turned into motion. The Megalodon is no different. Here, the shadow becomes a participant in the ancient exchange, taking what it needs, leaving the rest to flow onward in the great circle. It is easy, from the safety of your own time, to imagine the Megalodon as a solitary ruler. But here, on these roads beneath the waves, it is part of something larger. The ocean is not ruled, it is shared, in a shifting, unspoken balance. Even the mightiest predator cannot own the sea. It can only travel through it, as a guest who knows the language of its tides. And what of the nights? The ocean at night is not the same as the ocean by day. Above, the surface reflects the moon in trembling silver. Below, the darkness blooms with its own stars, tiny creatures glowing in blue and green, each flicker a secret signal. The Megalodon moves through this galaxy as a dark moon, scattering the light with each sweep of its tail. Some of the glowing life flees. Some drifts close, drawn by the shadow without knowing why. If you were beside it, you would hear almost nothing. The sound of its passage is a whisper, a shifting of water that seems more like breath than movement. And yet, in the deep, sound travels farther than sight. A whale song may pass through the shark's body like a memory, a reminder of places visited long ago. Perhaps this is how it knows when to turn, when to leave one current for another, by following the voices that have always been part of the ocean's music. There is a lesson in this. The Megalodon's journeys were not about speed. They were not about conquest. They were about connection to the water, to the seasons, to the invisible roads that join one distant place to another. The shark's life was a moving conversation between body and sea, each shaping the other over millions of years. You might wonder now, as the road stretches on before us, what it would be like to live without the straight lines we have made on our own maps. To move not according to fixed destinations, but according to the gentle pull of what is needed: food, warmth, the company of other lives. To trust the road without seeing it. to feel the shape of the journey in the bones, the way the Megalodon must have done. At last, the current carries the traveler toward the edge of a vast feeding ground. Here, the water grows richer, the air above filled with the cries of seabirds that circle and dive. The ocean smells of life, sharp, briny, electric. Beneath the surface, shadows shift and gather. The Megalodon slows, not out of hesitation, but in preparation. This is a place of work. This is where the patience of the road finds its purpose. The shark sinks lower, into the dim where outlines blur. From here, it will rise when the time is right, moving from traveler to hunter in the space between heartbeats. But that is another moment for another chapter. For now, it rests in the current, its great body aligned with the flow as if it were carved from it. And you, still beside it, feel the strange peace of knowing exactly where you are, without knowing the name of the place. You feel the road beneath you, though it has no edges. You feel the destination waiting, though it has no address. Perhaps that is the answer to our question. A traveler finds its way on a road with no edges, by becoming part of the road itself. The Megalodon did not command the currents. It listened to them. It let the water carry its weight, let the invisible paths guide its hunger and its rest. It moved in harmony with a world that asked nothing more of it than to follow the shape of the sea. Somewhere far ahead, the next season waits. The next migration will begin. The road will bend again as it always has, and the shadow will follow, unhurried and certain, along the roads beneath the waves. When a kingdom has no walls, how do its kings greet one another? The question floats like a feathered seed across the water's breath, light and persistent, refusing to sink. In the age before our names, the ocean held many thrones, none carved, none guarded by stone or spear. Power wore no crown. It moved, it listened, it learned. And across the warm, velvet miles of prehistoric sea, those powers sometimes met, great lives brushing against other great lives, as comets passed through each other's tails of light. The one we call Megalodon drifted among them, not always as hunter, not always as master, but as a presence, immense and undeniable, an answer waiting to see what the question would be. You drift beside the shadow, as you have learned to do, a little outside the wash of its tail, where the current is kind and unthreatening. The sea today is a sheet of hammered silver. Beneath it, the light falls like spoke and spoke through a wheel of blue. The reef sleeps in an afternoon hush. A mile offshore, the bottom drops away, the color deepens, and the open world begins. This is a crossroads, one of those gentle intersections the water makes without lines or signs, where warm lanes brush the rims of colder streams and travelers pause to taste the difference. It is here the first visitor appears. Not a rival in the way a mirror is a rival, reflecting your shape. Not an enemy, either. More like another verse in the same ocean song. A long shape approaches from the dark, flanked by a retinue of bubbles. Its head is squared and heavy, as though sculpted with a flat chisel. Its flukes write slow calligraphy in the blue. A whale, not one of the soft plankton kingdoms, but a hunter of hunters, a thinker with old eyes, its mouth lined not with baleen curtains but with teeth. The giant moves with practiced certainty, and the water seems to make way for it, like a village parting for a familiar elder. In some ages and places, there were whales that hunted like storms, shouldering through shoals, chasing fish and cousins with a mind sharpened by hunger and memory. In other seas, ancient giants with teeth and echo sense roamed in deep corridors, mapping with sound what sunlight could not show. Here, now, you watch the slow ceremony of approach. The whale angles, never directly across the shark's prow, never rudely, and turns so one deep I can take in the breadth of living iron in front of it. The Megalodon does not turn to face it head-on. It adjusts a fraction of a fraction, so the current carries a message. I see you. I am moving. We will not collide. Two worlds, overlapping like shadows on a wall. Two languages without words, pressures and distances, angles and breaths. If you had been taught the politeness of the deep, you would read it easily. The whale keeps a respectful margin, the way one mountain does not press up against another without cause. The shark maintains momentum but lowers the beat of its tail by one unhurried degree. Between them spreads a meadow of ordinary life. Fish, rays, small sharks, who instinctively leave a lane as the titans pass. Nothing dramatic happens. That is the point. The meeting is a kind of weather, noted, absorbed, continued. If there is rivalry, it has no flavor of anger. It is the rivalry of gravity and tide, two strengths negotiating without noise. The whale turns, a deliberate arc, and sinks toward the dimmer blue where its food will one day run. The Megalodon slides along the edge of warm and cool, a traveler following the seam. You feel a calm that has nothing to do with safety and everything to do with comprehension. Power that understands itself does not need to perform. Another day, another sea. The wind writes a different handwriting across the surface. Under it, the same script continues, old and wide. Here the open water is empty of the obvious giants, but the reef is a city busied with errands. It is in the leaning shadow along that city's outskirts that you catch sight of a pale shape, triangular and confident, a cousin wearing the future's face. Smaller than the great one beside you, but cut with a similar grammar. A wedge of motion, a backfin like a page crease, an eye that sorts the world quickly. It cruises along the reef's lip, turning tight circles around a bait ball of silver. The little world inside the ring flashes like a shaken mirror. Then the pale hunter darts in, bites once, and the circle breaks into scribbles. Cousins are not enemies. They are comparisons. They test the boundary between resemblance and difference. The smaller shark, sleek, curious, not yet the polished archetype it will someday become, notes the larger shadow without panic or worship. It gives way, leaves a comfortable span of water, and continues its precise feast. The Great One does not steal. It has its own errands, its own economy. Yet the presence of the Titan changes the city in a way only size can. You see it in the reef fish, who wheel a little wider, in the rays, who settle more deeply into sand, in the smaller hunters, who finish what they started with a new sense of briskness. Influence without touch. A current felt more than seen. Rivalry here is mostly arithmetic. Who eats what and when? Who moves where and why? Bodies that overlap in appetite will overlap in space, and space is the one coin the ocean cannot mint more of. Now and then, the arithmetic grows tense. A gray shadow lengthens along the reef's shoulder. The smaller shark stiffens, tips, considers. The Megalodon does not veer, but its head tilts a breath toward the other, an acknowledgement like the slight incline of a towering tree when a breeze passes. The smaller shark peels away, wisely, and the great one glides through the newly empty water like a season arriving. There is no dispute to record. Still, some page has turned. Beyond reefs and shelves lie plains where sand ripples like the backs of sleeping creatures. Out here, the horizon behind the horizon, you meet a different sort of rival. It is not a single animal but a multitude, woven together by thinking. Dolphins loop and stitch the water into baskets of strategy. They gather fish with teamwork that looks like play and is not. Their clicks stitch distance into fabric. Their whistles keep time. When a visitor with a moon-split tail wanders into their theater, they do not flee blindly. They draw lines. They test the shape of the new actor. They are cautious. They are bold. They are community. The Megalodon is not a joiner. His body is a private cathedral. Yet it understands these threaded hunters with the professional courtesy of a carpenter passing a mason on a road. When pods are abundant, the Great One seldom wastes thunder. There are easier choices. When the sea grows lean, calculations change, but even then the shark measures risk with the patience of a river. A circle of small minds can feel like a larger mind, and bruises carry lessons the deep does not quickly forget. Some encounters live not in flesh but in rumor. There were times and places where the sea kept other monarchs. Heavy-headed whales with jaws lined like saws, shark-broad cousins with teeth turned toward the same feasts. Did they meet the great shadow you follow now? The ocean rarely gives us witness statements. It offers fossils like postcards sent without return addresses. Still, the mind can practice gentle imagining. Picture a day when food was thin and lanes converged. A cold stream wafting rich breath into warm water. A sick whale, trailing the dull glitter of its life. 3 hunters feeling the same arithmetic tug in their bones. In such a triangle, nobody rules. The sea writes the problem and all 3 write attempts at the answer. There is etiquette even in tension. A turn that is too sharp says I am desperate. A charge that is too straight says I am foolish. The giants of that world, whale and shark and clever pack, learned each other's quiet limits. Now and then those limits broke, the way the best of bridges sway on violent nights. But more often they held, because the ocean favors the rhythm that can repeat, the dance that can continue. Extinction is the end of a sentence. Survival is a clause that says and, listen for a moment to absence. There are rivals you will not meet here because time kept them in other chapters. The long-bodied thunder lizards of earlier seas, with jaws hinged like gates, died before the shadow matured. Other sharp-mouthed kings would rise after, sleek and clever under colder moons. Such is the way of water. Reigns overlap not in duels but in echoes. The Megalodon carried the memory of those echoes the way a coastline carries the sound of yesterday's surf. A suggestion in the shape of cliffs, a caution written into bays. In the quiet seasons, rivals shrink to size. The shark glides through evening, a comet trailing meanings, while above, birds etch and erase their own brief histories in air. The reef hums with many small empires. Crab wars fought with gentle shoves. Octopus kingdoms that rise and fall with the moon. Parades of parrotfish grinding coral into beaches for feet unborn. Against this busyness, the giant's concerns look simple. Eat with precision. Travel with economy. Avoid injury. Let size do half the work of argument. You may be wondering what it felt like to move through a world where danger wore so many shapes. The ocean, after all, was never gentle. It was only balanced. Perhaps it felt the way walking through a city feels at night when you know its streets. Not safe exactly, but intimate. You learn which corners ask for alertness and which corners hold the glow of refuge. You feel, in your bones, when turning left will walk you into trouble and when it will bring you to a warm doorway. The Megalodon had that city in its blood. It did not predict. It understood. The difference is subtle and enormous. Prediction leans forward. Understanding rests. Occasionally, the sea writes a page that cannot be skimmed. A calf strays. A pod splits. A wave of cold needs warm paths into knots. Rivals collide not as dancers but as weather fronts. Pressure builds. Water grows tense. Even the plankton seem to hold their breath. The giant then is not a myth but a body, with all the limits bodies own. Commits, and commitment has consequences. Teeth meet flesh. Muscle answers peril with geometry. Sound becomes the field where choices leave their marks. And when the storm ends, the sea, practical as ever, resumes its calendar. Scavengers arrive, each more humble than the last, closing the circle with the tidy ethics of the deep. Nothing wasted, nothing saved beyond memory. Memory, yes, even a shark's mind, built for now, has its tidipools. Places where experience settles like coins at the bottom of a well. Pain teaches edges. Success teaches routes. A rival's silhouette, once harmless, may earn a wider margin next time. A pod's formation, once puzzling, becomes a sign. The giant is not a scholar with ink-stained fingers, but it learns. All endurance learns. Now the day collapses softly into pearl, and the water darkens into velvet you could almost touch. The giant tilts upward, tasting the thin skin where sea meets sky, and breathes not with lungs, but with motion. Nearby, another shadow rises. A whale, mild tonight, its plume a ghostly candle in moonlight. Far beyond, you hear the faint theater of dolphins rehearsing their mischief. To your right, on the black slope of the reef, a smaller shark traces tight figure eights, writing its name on the stone with attention alone. The stage holds them all. No curtain falls. So, then, how do kings greet one another when their kingdom has no walls? They do it by distance more than touch, by angle more than noise. They speak a grammar of water and weight. The respectful arc, the unhurried lane, the patience to let a moment turn into a decision rather than a collision. They do it by knowing that dominion is not a thing you own but a shape you fit. A rival is not a villain. It is a mirror with a different light. Let that be the lullaby that closes your eyes. A wide, unwalled kingdom where power bows to rhythm, where meetings are weather, where storms teach and calms restore, and where the great ones know each other not by the scars they cause but by the space they grant. Somewhere under the moon-brushed surface, the Megalodon turns without hurry, as if answering a question posed by another giant a mile away. The answer is simple as a tide. We are here. We have room. We will pass. And in the deep-lit corridors of the old sea, the kings continue their patrol, separate and entwined, writing the oldest diplomacy with fins and breath, their signatures dissolving into the blue as gently as sleep. Where does greatness begin? When it is born into a world already vast. The question feels fragile, like a small shell you turn over in your hand, its spirals leading inward to a hidden center. In the warm seas of the past, long before humans knew the ocean's weight, the great hunter we call Megalodon had to begin not as a monarch, but as something small enough to be cradled by currents. Even the largest shadow begins as a flicker. The sea is both mother and arena. For the newborn of giants, it can be a place of boundless danger. So the Megalodon, for all its power in adulthood, likely began life in places set apart. Hidden pockets of the ocean, shallow and warm, where the tides played more gently and the silhouettes of other hunters were rare. Scientists call such places nurseries, but the word feels too delicate, too quiet, for the restless, breathing gardens they truly were. Picture one now. A wide, shallow bay, cupped by long arms of land and tangled roots of mangrove trees. The water here is not the endless, sapphire blue of the open sea. It is green gold, sometimes cloudy with stirred sand. Sunlight penetrates easily, filling the shallows with heat. Seagrass meadows sway with the rhythm of the tide, their blades whispering together. The sound is a constant hush, like wind moving through tall grass on land. Tiny fish flit between the stalks. Crabs scuttle sideways across the sand. It is here, in such a protected place, that the first days of a megalodon's life might unfold. The young are already predators, their lineage demands it, but they are small enough to be prey themselves. Larger sharks, quick barracuda, even crocodiles in brackish channels could threaten them. Here in the nursery, the water is shallow enough that the deep ocean giants cannot enter easily, and yet deep enough for hunting and hiding. The baby shark, if you could call something already several feet long a baby, moves with bursts of energy, then stillness. Its body is soft with youth, the patterns along its flanks perhaps more pronounced than in adults, breaking up its outline among the shifting light. It learns the territory in small arcs, the sandy channels between seagrass, the edges of coral patches, the shelter beneath overhanging roots. For weeks, perhaps months, life is a study in small hunts. Schools of juvenile fish dart away like thrown silver coins. Small rays bury themselves in sand, giving away their position with a single, slow breath. The young megalodon strikes clumsily at first, overshooting its prey, wasting bursts of speed. But the sea is a patient teacher. Each mistake is written into muscle memory, each success a quiet layering of skill. You might think of the nursery as a cradle, but it is more like a workshop. Here, instincts are tested against reality. The senses sharpen, the eyes reading light and shadow, the lateral line detecting the faintest tremor in the water, the electroreceptors catching whispers of movement long before they are seen. The young shark learns to weave these senses together into a map of the world, one it will carry long after it leaves this place. The days in the nursery are measured not in hours but in tides. The incoming tide brings new scents, new prey, sometimes new dangers. The outgoing tide pulls the water and whatever floats in it, back toward the open sea. The young megalodon learns to read these shifts, to use them for ambush or for escape. The mangrove roots are allies, the shifting sands a shield. Above, seabirds skim the surface, their sharp eyes searching for the same fish the young shark seeks. At times, the water erupts and splashes as predator and predator meet in the chase, the bird's beak striking the surface just as the shark lunges from below. More often, they pass each other in parallel hunts, two different shapes of hunger sharing the same table. And yet, for all the busyness, there are moments of deep stillness. The heat of midday slows everything. The fish retreat to shade, the birds circle high, and the young megalodon rests along the sandy bottom, gills pulsing gently. From here, the surface is a wavering ceiling, and the mangrove roots are pillars holding it up. Sunlight filters through in shifting bands, and the entire nursery seems to hum with a low, steady heartbeat. If you let yourself float here in thought, you might notice that these nurseries are like pockets of time as well as space. The open ocean runs on a schedule of migrations, storms, and seasons, a fast, unrelenting rhythm. But the nursery moves slower, like a side channel off a great river. Here, there is room to learn, to grow, to make mistakes without ending them in catastrophe. This slowing is the gift that allows a shadow to one day grow into the size of a legend. Months pass. The young shark grows heavier, faster, more precise. It begins to venture toward the outer edges of the nursery, into deeper channels where the water darkens and the smell of the open ocean rides in on the tide. These forays are like the testing of wings, not yet a departure, but a rehearsal. Each time, the young one returns, carrying new knowledge back like a treasure. But the day comes when the tide and the body agree. The nursery has given all it can. The shark is large enough now to hunt more broadly, strong enough to defend itself against many threats, and driven by the same deep pull that shapes all migrations. The open sea waits, not as a welcoming parent but as a vast, indifferent stage. The departure is not a ceremony. It is simply the next step in the long sentence of the shark's life. The mangrove shadows fall away behind, the water deepens, and the floor of the sea slopes down into the pale blue distance. For the first time, the young megalodon feels the unbroken sway of open ocean swells, the taste of currents unfiltered by the shore. It will never return to the nursery. That chapter is over. But everything it learned there will travel in its body, the precision of the strike, the patience in waiting, the map of currents and cover. These skills will be tested again and again in the years to come, in seas that are colder, rougher, and far less forgiving. And so, perhaps the answer to our question is this: greatness begins not in size, but in shelter. In a place just small enough to teach focus, just wide enough to teach confidence. The nursery does not make the giant, it allows the giant to make itself. If you close your eyes now, you can still hear the sounds of that sheltered place. The soft swish of seagrass, the gentle clink of shells moved by tide, the muffled rush of a young tail learning its own strength. Somewhere in that green and golden water, a shadow moves, small now, but carrying within it the shape of the vastness it will one day claim. The nursery fades into the distance, but the story moves forward, into deeper water, where the young hunter will meet the true expanse of its world. The sea is waiting, and it is endless. How does a wanderer learn the size of its own world? The question is a tide in your mind, slow, insistent, filling each hollow before moving on. For the megalodon just grown beyond its nursery, the open ocean is not simply a new home. It is an entire galaxy, each current a star trail, each horizon a distant moon. The sheltered green waters of its youth are now behind, their warm shallows fading into memory. The shark's body, heavier now, slides with ease through the deeper lanes. Here, the color beneath is a pure, endless blue. Not the shifting green of the nursery, not the bright mirror of the shore, but a vastness so steady it feels like time itself. The young hunter swims into it without ceremony, carried on instinct as ancient as the ocean's breath. At first, the sea seems almost too big. The floor lies far below, a blurred shadow of itself. The shore, when visible, is a pale, distant line. Everything is motion, not frantic but eternal. The lift and fall of the swell, the pull of the currents, the dim procession of shapes moving through the water's halls. For a creature born in the safety of roots and shallow grass, this is the first true encounter with scale. The young shark learns quickly that the open ocean is a place of patience. Prey is not everywhere. It is found along invisible highways at certain seasons in certain places. The shark's body, tuned by its lineage, begins to read these signs. A faint change in temperature across its skin, the delicate shift of salt and silt, the vibration of distant life carried through water like music in a cathedral. It hunts smaller prey now than it will in later years. Not yet the full-sized whales it will one day pursue, but seals, large fish, and young cetaceans crossing from one range to another. The hunts are not constant. Days may pass with only small meals, and the young shark learns to let hunger be a companion, not an enemy. In the open ocean, energy is currency, and it is spent carefully. You might think of this time as the shark's apprenticeship. It is no longer the unsure hunter of the nursery, but not yet the confident master of the deep. Every pursuit, every encounter with another predator, is a lesson written into its muscles. A failed strike is not wasted. It leaves behind knowledge about speed, about distance, about the timing of light and shadow. Once, the young shark follows the faint call of movement far ahead. A scatter of dolphins corralling a school of fish. It draws near but does not charge. Instead, it watches from the edges, measuring their speed, their coordination, the way they shape the school into a sphere before striking. It learns that not all hunts require stealth. Some require force and teamwork, though this is not the Megalodon's way. Still, the pattern settles into memory, filed away in the silent library of the mind. The open ocean is also the first place the young shark meets storms. In the nursery, storms were muted, wind over trees, waves that broke themselves in the shallows. But out here, storms arrive like gods. The wind turns the surface into a heaving skin, the light vanishes into the churn, and the currents twist with unfamiliar strength. The shark dives deep when this happens, beyond the reach of the worst chaos, where the water grows stiller and darker. Here, it glides until the surface quiets, feeling the muffled thrum of the storm above like a heartbeat heard through a wall. Storms teach a different lesson, that not all movement is your own. The oceans can lift you, turn you, carry you miles from your intended path. The wise do not fight it endlessly. They bend with it, saving strength for the moments that require their own decision. In its first years in the open sea, the young Megalodon also begins to discover the vast cycles that rule the blue. Whales appear along certain routes, at certain times of year, their voices weaving through the water like slow bells. Shoals of fish erupt in numbers that darken the sea, only to vanish again into smaller streams. The shark learns to follow these patterns, not as a mind tracing a map, but as a body attuning to a rhythm. If you were here, drifting in the lane beside it, you would notice how much of the shark's time is not spent hunting, but simply moving. The journey is the ocean's first demand. Movement keeps the gills breathing, the senses awake, the muscles tuned. Movement is also the search itself. Every glide a question asked of the water, every flick of the tail an answer returned. And yet, there is still play in the life of this young hunter. On days when the sea is clear and prey abundant, it moves with a kind of lightness, twisting through drifting kelp, chasing a fish not from hunger but from curiosity, surfacing just enough to feel the warmer skin of water touched by the sun. Such moments do not fill the belly, but they may feed something else, something less visible. The deep, wordless familiarity with the world it will one day rule. Time in the open ocean is counted differently. A year is not a single sweep, but a spiral, returning to the same places, meeting the same seasons, but always from a slightly different angle. The young Megalodon grows into these spirals, each turn adding weight to its body, certainty to its movements, and knowledge to its silent store. There are dangers, of course. Larger, older predators sometimes cross its path. Most are avoided with a respectful distance, a slow arc away from potential conflict. Now and then, the young shark must claim a kill from smaller but more aggressive hunters. A sharp turn, a single display of size, enough to send them scattering. It learns that in the open sea, reputation travels faster than sound. It also learns loss. Not every hunt succeeds. Not every meal is kept. Sometimes, in the wide blue, hunger sharpens into an ache. The shark answers not with desperation, but with motion. Always moving, always searching, trusting that the ocean's cycle will eventually turn its face toward plenty again. This trust is not blind faith. It is the oldest contract between predator and sea. And so, little by little, the young Megalodon's world expands. It comes to know bays where whales calve, shelves where fish gather in clouds, deep channels where currents meet in rich turbulence. It knows the smell of distant shores long before they rise on the horizon, the taste of water that has traveled far from polar ice, the dim hum of seismic shifts beneath the seabed. By the end of these first years, it is no longer young by the standards of the ocean. It is large now, large enough to be the shadow that smaller hunters notice and give way to. The open sea, once overwhelming in its size, has become something familiar, though never small. The Megalodon has learned the shape of its world the way a bird learns the shape of the sky, by flying through it over and over until the distance itself becomes home. Perhaps that is the answer to our question. A wanderer learns the size of its own world not by seeing its edges, but by moving through it until it is no longer strange. The Megalodon's first roads into the blue are not measured in miles, but in the weaving of memory into muscle, hunger into patience, motion into knowledge. And now, somewhere in the long ribbon of current, the shark moves with a new ease, its path no longer hesitant. It has begun to belong to the sea in a way it did not before. The nursery is a memory, the open ocean a living map, and the future, vast, unending, waits in the deep lanes ahead. What does it mean to stand at the very center of your world? The question drifts out across the blue like a gull riding a long updraft. You watch it go the way you watch a cloud, knowing it will return in another form. For the Megalodon, this moment, these years, are the summit of a life lived entirely in motion. The awkward bursts of youth are gone. The uncertainties of the first hunts have faded into instinct. Now it moves through the ocean as a sculptor moves through a gallery, unhurried, aware, confident in the weight of its own presence. The body is at its fullest strength. Each sweep of the tail is a sentence written in a language the sea has known for millions of years. The head, broad as a door, is an archive of senses. Eyes drinking in color and shadow, pores tasting the electric signatures of life, skin tuned to the tremor of fin beats far beyond sight. The jaw is no longer just a tool. It is a promise, lined with teeth that speak in serrated certainty. The ocean responds to this maturity in ways both subtle and clear. Smaller hunters adjust their routes when the shadow appears. Pods of dolphins shift to denser formations. Even the whales, those great, breathing continents, alter course when the Megalodon's path runs too close to their own. It is not fear in the human sense. It is the instinctive geometry of survival, the awareness that the largest player on the board has entered the game. And yet, the shark's dominance is not written in constant violence. In its prime, it does not need to kill recklessly to remind the ocean who it is. Its size, its confidence, and the invisible network of awareness among sea creatures all work as a kind of gravity, a pull that clears space around it. Power at its peak can be as quiet as a still tidal. You drift alongside it now, though to keep pace you must imagine yourself as current rather than body. The speed is deceptive, smooth and unbroken. It feels slow until you notice the landscape of the seafloor sliding past far below. The shark follows the great corridors of migration, the places where life funnels through the ocean's wide architecture. It has learned these roads over years, not in straight lines but in loops that follow the pulse of the seasons. Here comes one of those corridors now. The water ahead darkens with the shadows of whales, dozens of them, moving steadily toward their breeding grounds. They are not the largest whales the future will know, but to the shark they are rich with the promise of energy. Not all will be targeted, many are too strong, too healthy. The Megalodon moves among them like a storm front sliding along a coastline, testing for weakness. It does not rush. Instead, it matches pace, letting the currents of sound and movement tell their stories. A calf strays a little from its mother's flank, curious, unworried. The mother's body shifts to block the gap. The shark drifts on. Patience is a hunter's oldest ally. When the opportunity comes, it is sudden and exact. A sick whale, trailing behind, its strokes uneven. The shark's body tilts, the tail drives, and the water between them collapses. You do not see frenzy. You see precision, an angle chosen, a burst time to meet the moment when the prey cannot change course. The strike is swift. The sea blooms briefly with turbulence, then settles again. The megalodon feeds, but without waste. The meal will last for days, perhaps weeks. In its prime, the hunter knows when to end the chase and when to begin it. Such hunts are not every day. Between them are long hours of travel, exploration, and rest. Rest for a creature this size is not sleep in the way you know it, but a slow drifting through depths where light softens and water cools. The shark's gills still draw oxygen from the passing water. Its senses still drink in the world, but its muscles ease. These moments are as much a part of its reign as the hunts themselves, the quiet stewardship of strength. There are encounters, too, with other rulers of smaller domains. A massive pod of orcas, black and white in the sunlit blue, passes ahead. They are intelligent, coordinated, capable of hunting even large sharks. But this meeting is not a challenge. The two sides keep their distance, exchanging only the acknowledgement of shared power. In the deep, survival is often written in the choice to avoid unnecessary tests. Prime years also bring the widest range of travel. The megalodon now moves between oceans, following warm currents across hemispheres. It may begin a journey in waters that shimmer with tropical light and end it in cooler, richer seas where storms brood on the horizon. It has become a citizen of the entire blue planet, a living bridge between distant coasts. If you could trace its paths from above, they would look like great brushstrokes across the globe, looping, intersecting, bending with the seasons. And yet, from within the water, there is no map, only a rhythm. Warm to cold, rich to lean, plenty to scarcity and back again. The shark has learned to trust this rhythm the way a tree trusts the turn of winter into spring. Sometimes, in the dim hours before dawn, the ocean feels like a cathedral. The surface is still, the moonlight filters through in silver ladders, and the deep hum of distant life fills the water like an organ's note. The megalodon moves slowly then, not hunting, not hurrying, simply existing at the heart of its own domain. It has no need to prove its mastery to itself. It is written in every pulse of muscle, every choice to move or not move. Perhaps this is what it means to stand at the center of your world. Not to dominate every moment, but to fit so perfectly into the shape of it that the sea itself seems built around you. The megalodon, in these years, is not merely a part of the ocean's story. It is one of the great sentences in the language of life, a sentence written slowly, in a hand that spans millions of years. And yet, even at the height of power, the sea remains larger. Storms still come. Currents still shift. Prey is not always where it should be. The shark answers these with the same patience it learned as a young hunter. It does not expect the ocean to bend. It bends itself instead, flowing around obstacles, waiting out the lean days. From your quiet place beside it, you can feel the balance, immense strength, endless patience, and the knowledge that both will be needed for as long as the journey continues. This is not the reckless rule of a tyrant, but the seasoned reign of one who knows that nothing in the sea is permanent, not even the shadow of a giant. So perhaps the answer is this: to stand at the center of your world is to carry it within you. The megalodon's body holds the memory of the nursery, the roads of the open ocean, the taste of prey in every sea, the shape of currents under every sky. It moves now not as a visitor, but as the sea's own thought given muscle and fin. And somewhere ahead, the next horizon waits, no closer, no farther than the rhythm will allow. The shark turns toward it without haste, the ocean parting around its bulk as easily as air parts around a drifting cloud. You follow in its wake, and for a moment, it feels as though the whole planet is moving with you. What lives in the spaces between light and dark? And why are we drawn there? The question falls through the water like a single grain of silt, sinking slowly, spiraling toward the place where sunlight thins and shadow begins its reign. The megalodon, master of the bright, open lanes of the sea, is not a creature of great depths. And yet, there are times when the pull of the twilight zone is irresistible. Here, far below the surface but still above the black true deep, the water cools and the blue grows heavy, as if the very color is thickening. This is the ocean's dusk. Not a sudden change, but a long, slow exhale of light. Above you, the surface is still a memory, a rippling mirror you can almost imagine reaching. Below, there is no bottom yet, only the fading glow that pours down in thinning threads. In this place, the Megalodon moves differently. In the open sunlit waters, it glides with ease, confident in every shape it sees. Here, vision changes. Shadows grow strange. The outlines of fish become faint brushstrokes. The eyes adjust, reading the softest glimmers, the faintest motion. But sight is no longer the first guide. The other senses rise to meet the dimming world. The lateral line along the shark's body listens for pressure changes. The quiet pulse of a squid's fin stroke, the distant turn of a larger body. The electroreceptors taste the faint, steady beat of living hearts in the gloom. The water carries these whispers farther here, without the busy interference of the surface. In the twilight zone, sound and vibration are the truest lanterns. If you are drifting beside it, you might notice that the pace here is slower, not from hesitation, but from the patience of knowing that everything moves differently in this dimness. Prey is less likely to flee far. Predators are more careful in their approach. Even the great Megalodon conserves energy, allowing itself to be pulled by the subtle slope of a current. Why come here at all? For the same reason any hunter explores. The promise of food, the curiosity of change, the quiet call of the unknown. Large fish rise from deeper layers in the evening, chasing plankton that follow the last traces of light. Squid, strange and soft-bodied, drift upward from the dark to feed. Sometimes even young whales venture down here, testing their own limits. The Megalodon's massive silhouette is almost dreamlike in this half-light, less a solid form, more a moving suggestion. Its pale underside blends with what remains of the glow above. Its darker back melts into the deep below. Camouflage works both ways in this realm. It hides the hunter from the hunted, and the hunted from the hunter. This makes the chase an art of closeness. A shadow looms ahead, a shoal of large fish, their scales reflecting what little light remains like scattered coins at the bottom of a fountain. The shark drifts closer, each movement a careful subtraction of distance. There is no sudden rush here. The twilight is a place of quiet ambush, not open pursuit. When the moment comes, it is a clean, brief arc of motion. The jaws open, the water parts, and the prize is taken with minimal struggle. In a world where visibility is short, the fewer ripples you leave behind, the better. And then, just as quickly, stillness returns. The sea here has a way of swallowing disturbance, smoothing over the evidence of what has passed. You might feel it too, that sense of the ocean gently erasing its own handwriting. Sometimes, the Megalodon comes here not to hunt but to travel. The twilight zone can be a quieter road, away from the constant motion and competition of the bright surface lanes. Here, the pressure is heavier, the temperature cooler, and the silence deeper. The shark moves as if in a trance, accompanied only by the slow drift of translucent creatures that pulse with dim light. Lanternfish, jelly-like forms with organs that glow faintly in greens and blues, tiny constellations floating through the dusk. This light, made by the bodies themselves, is the ocean's own language, bioluminescence. It signals, it distracts, it hides. To us, it is beautiful. To the Megalodon, it is information. A flicker here may mean prey. A sudden bloom there could signal a disturbance worth investigating or avoiding. The pressure at this depth would crush the lungs of land animals, but the shark's body is built for the embrace of the sea. Its cartilage skeleton flexes, its muscles hold their strength. In the stillness, you might think it is resting, but the truth is more subtle. It is listening, feeling, storing this twilight in the library of its experience. Every journey into the dusk ends with a choice: to sink further into the black, or to rise again toward the light. The Megalodon, unlike the deep-diving whales, rarely descends into the midnight zone. That is a world for others, for the beaked whales and the great squids, for creatures that have never seen the sun. The shark is of the light, even if it visits the edge of darkness. So, after an hour, a day, or just the span of a passing current, it begins the slow climb back toward the surface. The ascent is a kind of reawakening. Shapes grow clearer, colors return. The water warms, and the chorus of the surface life grows louder. The first strong gleams of sunlight spill down to meet the rising hunter, and the twilight, with its muted voices and dim lanterns, fades into memory. But memory is the reason for the visit. A megalodon that knows the twilight zone knows another layer of its kingdom, another texture of the sea's vast fabric. It has learned the slower pulse, the patience, the quiet strategies that can be brought even into the bright shallows when needed. The twilight teaches humility too. Here, the giant is not always the first to see. Here, even a body the size of a bus can vanish into shadow if it holds still. Perhaps that is the answer to our question. The spaces between light and dark are not only where the strange lives. They are where the known learns from the unknown. The megalodon, in these visits, becomes not just a ruler of the bright blue, but a student of the dim. And now, as it breaks once more into the light, the great body casting its shadow downward, you feel as if you've returned from a dream. The surface stretches away in all directions, as though nothing had changed. But you know, and the shark knows, that beneath this glow, there is another world waiting, one that keeps its own hours and speaks in its own quiet tongue. It will go there again in its own time, and when it does, the line between hunter and wanderer will blur, as it always does in the twilight. When does an ending truly begin? And can those living within it ever feel the first turn of the tide? The question comes quietly, like the first cool breath of wind before a distant storm. Too faint to raise alarm, but enough to stir a few leaves at the edge of the forest. In the vast oceans of 3 million years ago, life moved in its eternal patterns, or so it seemed. Currents still carved their great loops around the globe, whales still sang their long, low songs, and the megalodon still swam the highways of abundance it had known for a lifetime. But even the largest shadow in the sea cannot see the horizon of time bending. The changes, when they began, were slow. Not the violence of a sudden wave, but the patient reshaping of the shoreline, one grain of sand at a time. The waters began to cool. Only by degrees, only in certain places, and only in certain seasons at first. But the ocean is a connected fabric, and when you pull at one corner, the whole cloth shifts. The warm lanes that had always been so generous in prey began to narrow. Cold water, rich with life in its own way, flowed farther toward the equator, bringing new species and new competition. The megalodon felt this not as a revelation, but as a series of small puzzles. A familiar bay that once teemed with seals lay quiet for a season. A migration route of whales arrived later than expected, their numbers thinner, their calves fewer. In its prime, the great shark had always found another lane, another feast. But now, there were moments when hunger lingered longer, and travel stretched farther between hunts. You might not notice these as you drift beside it. The ocean is too vast to betray its deeper stories easily. A clear blue morning still looks like a clear blue morning. But to the shark, whose life is written in the subtle language of scent, pressure, and movement, the script was changing. The taste of the water shifted. Slightly more brine here, slightly colder there. The familiar background murmur of life in certain regions became thinner, as if a section of the ocean's orchestra had gone silent. Some changes were more visible. New predators began to appear in greater numbers, especially in cooler waters. Orcas, clever and coordinated, ranged farther than before, their pods tighter, their hunts more daring. They were not a constant threat to a full-grown megalodon, but they competed for the same prey. And in the language of the deep, competition is not a conversation. It is a constant negotiation, played out in the spacing of routes and the timing of arrivals. There were also shifts in the prey themselves. Whales that once swam openly through certain channels began hugging the colder currents, perhaps following food of their own. Many grew larger over generations, their size becoming a kind of shield against the great shark. The smaller, more vulnerable species drifted toward the poles, into waters the megalodon could not easily claim. The feast was not gone, but the table was changing shape. And yet, for a time, life went on. The megalodon was still immense, still a master of its domain, still capable of drawing the ocean's energy into its body with a single decisive hunt. It did not fear the changes. It simply moved with them, as it had always moved with the ocean's moods. The great predator had never known a world that stood still. But change, once begun, has its own momentum. The cooling grew more pronounced. Ice gathered at the poles, inching outward in a slow, bright creep. The planet's heartbeat shifted. Currents rerouted themselves like rivers after a landslide. The great warm highways narrowed further, and with them, the range where the Megalodon could hunt with ease. If you could lift yourself above the sea and see the whole blue globe at once, you might notice how the predator's vast range began to fray at the edges, like an old net coming undone. Isolated warm patches remained, rich, yes, but smaller. Journeys between them became longer, more costly. The energy of the hunt had to be balanced against the energy of travel, and the balance began to lean the wrong way. The shark did not know it was living in the first chapters of its ending. To live in the present is to assume there will always be another season, another migration, another day. Even now, it still hunted with precision, still traveled with patience, still slipped into the twilight when the moment called for quiet. But the intervals between abundance grew wider, the lean days stacked closer together. And then there was the matter of the young. In an age when nurseries had once been safe pockets of plenty, they now felt the pinch of scarcity more sharply. Prey was harder to find close to shore. Competition from other predators was fiercer. Fewer young megalodons reached the size where they could challenge the open ocean. The chain between generations stretched thinner, even if the great hunters of the moment swam on unaware. The megalodon you follow, this single, vast creature in the middle of its reign, still carries itself with the quiet gravity of mastery. But you can feel it now if you listen closely. The sea's song is changing key. The bright, abundant verses are giving way to slower, more complex notes. The roads of the ocean, once wide and warm, are narrowing into cooler corridors. The world is not ending in a crash. It is tilting slowly into a shape that will not favor giants. Perhaps this is the truest nature of endings, that they do not arrive all at once, like a sudden wave, but seep in gradually, like a slow tide rising unnoticed while you stand on the shore. And for the megalodon, this tide had already begun to lap at the edges of its vast domain. If you were to ask the shark, it would not speak of loss. It would speak only of movement, of the search for the next place where life runs thick. It would not mourn the absence of the past. The ocean has no nostalgia. But it would know, in the wordless way a body knows, that the search takes longer now, and the spaces between feasts are growing wider. Perhaps the answer to our question is this. An ending begins not with the last act, but with the first subtle shift in rhythm, the note you almost miss, the scent that is almost the same as before. The megalodon swims on, still the giant of its world, but the world itself is turning the page beneath it. Somewhere ahead lies another migration, another hunt, another season of plenty. But also ahead, far enough that the shark cannot sense it, close enough that the ocean can, is the edge of an age. The ice will come farther. The prey will change course. The giants will grow fewer. For now, though, the great predator glides through waters still rich enough to hold its place. The sun paints the surface gold above, the deep hums with life below, and the future, vast, cold, and patient, waits just beyond the horizon. And you, following in its wake, feel the faint shiver of that waiting, even in this moment of calm. The ending has begun, but like all endings, it will take its time. When does a story truly end? When the final moment arrives, or when its voice fades from the world around it? The question drifts like a long, slow swell across the surface of the ancient sea. The world is changing now, though no single day can be pointed to as the day the megalodon ceased to rule. Change is never that neat in the ocean. It comes as a series of subtle rewritings, of coastlines, of temperatures, of the silent routes prey take through the water. The giant still swims, still hunts, still moves with the steady gravity of one who has never known defeat. But the warm, wide roads that once stretched endlessly are now fewer. The sea is cooler in many places. The rich feeding grounds are smaller, patchier. Whales pass in leaner numbers, their bodies often larger, more difficult to fell. The giant follows them still, but each chase must be measured against the cost of the journey. The ocean itself has become a more complex puzzle. New predators rise in places where the Megalodon once hunted without competition. Clever, fast, coordinated. Orcas range more boldly, working together in a way even the largest shark cannot match. Smaller sharks, though no direct threat to the giant, are many, their hunger spilling into what was once unchallenged territory. For the Megalodon, this is not tragedy. It is simply the new shape of the world. It has never known the concept of permanence, never expected the sea to hold still for its sake. The ocean's rules are as old as water itself. Move, adapt, endure until you cannot. You watch it now, gliding through a channel it has known since its youth. The seafloor here is paler than the deep blue lanes, dotted with coral mounds and slow-moving turtles. The giant hunts without urgency, circling a school of large fish. It takes one cleanly and drifts afterward in the still water. This is not the hunger of youth, no frantic feeding, no endless pursuit. It is a quieter kind of living, one shaped by the knowledge that energy must be guarded. There are still days of abundance. A sick whale, separated from its pod, drifts into the shark's path, and the hunt ends quickly. The feast lasts for days. The giant rests afterward in deeper, cooler water, its body heavy and content. These moments feel like the old days, and perhaps they are, a brief echo of the rain that once seemed eternal. But in between these days, the spaces widen. The sea grows quieter. Journeys stretch longer between the pockets of plenty. And the body, though still formidable, no longer renews itself as swiftly as it once did. A torn fin takes longer to heal. Muscles ache after the longest chases. Even the senses, sharp as they remain, sometimes miss the faintest vibrations they once would have caught. Perhaps this is how endings come in the ocean. Not with a final blow, not with a single defeat, but with the slow dimming of the advantages that once made survival effortless. The Megalodon does not know this in words, but it feels it in the way the currents press more heavily against its body, in the way its path through the sea feels less like command and more like negotiation. It is still a giant. It will always be a giant until the moment it is not. On a certain day, one that could be any day, the great shark moves through cooler waters, far from the rich bays of the past. A storm has churned the surface, and the deeper layers are unsettled. The shark drifts lower, conserving strength. In the distance, the faint shapes of whales pass, too far and too swift to follow. The ocean hums softly, but the voices within it are fewer now. You follow as the giant glides into a darker trench, its shape fading against the blue-black slope. It slows. Perhaps it is resting. Perhaps it is simply letting the current carry it for a time. There is no drama here, no final fight. Only the sea, as it has always been, moving on around every living thing. Somewhere, another Megalodon swims, younger, stronger, still learning the shrinking map of the world. But there are fewer of them now. Fewer nurseries. Fewer places where a giant can grow into its full strength. The chain is thinning link by link. And so, without witness, without record, the last of the great hunters will one day swim its final path. Perhaps it will be after a long, lean season, when hunger finally outruns patience. Perhaps it will be in a sudden encounter with a rival, or a wound that heals too slowly. Perhaps it will be in the quiet way of the ocean, drifting into stillness and sinking gently to the seafloor, to be taken apart by smaller lives who waste nothing. The sea will not pause. The currents will not bend in mourning. Life will continue its cycles, filling the space left behind. New rulers will rise, sleeker, faster, tuned to the colder waters of a new age. The story of the Megalodon will be written into their bones in ways they cannot name. And yet, a nothing is ever truly gone from the ocean. The giant's teeth, scattered across the seabed, will rest for millions of years, sharp as the day they were shed. Its shape will live on in the deep memory of the sea, and in the quiet awe of creatures who sense, without knowing why, that the water once carried something larger than any shadow they will ever see. You and I, standing impossibly far in the future, will one day find those teeth. We will lift them from the sand, run our fingers along the serrated edge, and wonder at the life that carried them. We will picture the endless blue lanes, the slow, confident glide, the patience of the hunt. We will imagine the ocean as it was, warmer and wilder, and feel a pang for the giant who ruled it. Perhaps that is the real answer to our question. A story does not truly end when the last breath is taken. It ends only when its memory fades from the living world. And in the ocean, memory is long. It lives in the shape of currents, in the routes of whales, in the cautious spacing of smaller sharks. It lives in the way we speak the name Megalodon, as if it is both a fact and a dream. Somewhere, in the great fabric of time, the last shadow slipped beneath the waves and did not return. But in the water's own way, it still moves. A ghost in the currents, a whisper in the deep, a presence you can almost feel if you close your eyes and listen to the slow, heavy beat of a tail cutting through the blue. The sea keeps its secrets, but it also keeps its stories. And the story of the Megalodon will drift forever, carried on the same currents it once ruled, never fully lost. And so, the final image is this. A vast horizon, the sun just touching the water, and beneath it, a shadow moving away from us, steady and unhurried. The light fades, the water darkens, and the shadow blends into the deep until there is no difference between them. The giant is gone. The ocean remains. The tide turns. The story rests. But the dream swims on.